According to Forbes, Warren Buffett, arguably the world's greatest ever investor, was worth 150 billion US dollars in 2025. So it might be fair to say that his recently written retirement letter has no relevance to our lives at all. After all, regardless of how we've done from a financial standpoint, we're not going to be Warren Buffett. But here's the thing. Having read the retirement letter and read a decent number of Warren Buffett's writings over the past few years, I reckon there's plenty in his writing about life and not just money, but also about work, relationships, and how to live a life well lived. So in today's video, I want to talk about what Warren Buffett can teach us about a life well lived, and there's 7 things we can proactively take action on today to live the best next chapter of our lives. Welcome to What Happens Next. Warren Buffett, the world's greatest ever investor, has recently announced at the young age of 95 that he is going quiet, as he puts it, and letting his successor take over day-to-day running of Berkshire Hathaway, his business. Now, if you only had a cursory understanding or you just read about him in the paper, you'd think of Warren Buffett as an investor. But I think you'd be surprised about the letter Buffett wrote recently to announce his retirement. Because in the letter, Buffett doesn't talk about market trading or timing. Instead, he talks about luck. He talks about friendship. He talks about aging. He talks about the mistakes he's made. He talks about legacy and contribution. And if you'd like to read the full letter, I'll make sure we put that in the comments below. The interesting thing is he talks about all of the things that we should be considering when we're thinking about the next chapter of our lives. Because whether you've built a business, led a successful career, or simply navigated life with all its random twists and turns, we get to a stage often where it becomes less about accumulating more and actually about living more. So today, we're going to unpack the 7.5 lessons Warren Buffett can teach us about a life well lived. Not lessons for billionaires, not lessons for fund managers, but lessons for anyone who wants to make their second part of their life richer, more meaningful, and more intentional than their first. And let's start with lesson number 1. Acknowledge your luck and then decide what you're going to do with it. One of the first things that jumped out of Warren Buffett's retirement letter for me is his thoughts and his comments about luck. Because he talks about being lucky. He talks about being born at the right time, in the right place, with the right opportunities. He talks about his moments in early life, which could have gone very differently. He talks about the luck he had from meeting people, having mentors, teachers, neighbours who nudged him forward without needing anything in return. He sums it up in the letter with one simple phrase: wow, thank you, Lady Luck. Now, it would be easy for a man worth $150 billion to pretend it was all him. But he doesn't, and I reckon that's important. Why? Because actually, Warren Buffett knows that being grateful for the good fortune we had really has positive impacts on our well-being and happiness. Now, clearly, if you're watching this, it's likely you've worked hard. It's likely you've made good decisions and put in the hours. But let's not underestimate the fact that at any part of our lives, good fortune plays a part too. The interesting thing when we're thinking about the next chapter of our lives is how important gratitude is to improve our well-being. And it's interesting because if you look at what Buffett does, his focus over the last few years hasn't been on accumulating more and more. It's actually been on giving away the majority of his money. That means that his focus has turned from accumulation to contribution. Now, you don't need Buffett's billions to take something away from that. You just need the willingness to say, I've had some luck in my life. Now, how do I turn that luck into something meaningful for the next chapter? That might mean creating the time and space to deepen relationships. It might mean supporting your family in ways that align with your values. It might mean spending money on experiences to enhance the memories you create with the people you love and like. It might mean giving your time and skills and your wisdom away to others to help them. Or it might mean just simply living with more appreciation for the life you've built. The question worth asking, I believe, is how do you use the good fortune you've built to live the life you want to live now and in the future? Let's take lesson number 2. Your environment matters. One of the most surprising things when you dig into Buffett's story is how ordinary parts of his life are. At any point in the last 60 years, he could have moved to New York or LA or London or Singapore. He could have lived in a skyscraper or on a private island or in a mansion, but he didn't. He stayed in Omaha, Nebraska, in the same house he bought in 1958. The same streets he lived in, the same communities, and the same local office to run his business he still visited before he retired 5 days a week. In Buffett's retirement letter, he talks fondly about Omaha, Nebraska, and the fact that it's been really important to him. For Buffett, Omaha is the place that shaped him, the place that grounded him, the place filled with the doctors, teachers, neighbours and lifelong friends who influenced each and every stage of his life. And this leads to a second big lesson. Your environment, the people and places you surround yourself with, are often ignored, but it is an important part for the next chapter of your life. When people hit their what happens next phase of life, it's common to focus on the numbers. Will I have enough? Will I run out? Can I afford to stop working? How do I structure my income to maintain the lifestyle that I want? What about tax? And what about market downturns? And actually, these are really important questions. But there's something more important that often gets ignored. And that's what we do with our time and how we shape our environment to make sure we're living the life we want. Because environments can shape habits, environments can shape relationships, and environments can shape your sense of purpose and community. And often our environment shift when we make that move to the next chapter of our lives. If we're used to going to work 5 days a week, we're used to being in that environment. If we've built and then sold our business, our environment will change. So let me ask you something. Is the place you live today physically, but also the places you choose to spend your time in, the right place for you to live the next chapter of your lives? Now, you might be in the place today because it was the right place for you in your 30s and 40s and aligned to work. It might have been a great place to bring up for the kids. But the question I'd ask is it the right place for you now? For many people I work with, that question sparks a bit of an insight. Some realise they want to be nearer to family or further from expectations. Some want community, actual neighbours they can talk to, not just people who live on the same street. Some want nature, fields, sea air, space to walk and breathe. Some want culture. Some want simplicity. Whatever you want, looking at your environment and seeing if it suits the next chapter of your life. For Buffett, he loves where he lives. It gave him the stability, focus and relationships that allowed everything else in his life to flourish. So when you're thinking about the next chapter of your life, it might be the perfect time to ask, where do I want the next 20 to 30 years to happen? What kind of community do I want around me? What kind of environment is going to make me healthier, happier and more connected? And does where I live today reflect who I want to be today and tomorrow? If you're planning your financial future, think about where you are geographically, but also what environments with the right people you want to be in. Because money can give you options, but place can positively or negatively contribute to your way of life. Lesson number 3 from Warren Buffett is the way he talks about investment. not in financial terms, but with people. When you read Buffett's letter, you really start to notice something. For a man famous for analysing companies' numbers and balance sheets, he spends an extraordinary amount of time in the letter talking about people. Not markets, profits or performance, people. He talks fondly about Charlie Munger, his business partner and closest friend for over 6 decades. Somebody he describes with admiration and affection, almost like an older brother who looked out for him, challenged him and helped him shape the man he is today. He talks about Don Keogh, the neighbour turned businessman whose warmth and personal connection mattered just as much as his brilliance in business. He talks about teachers, mentors, neighbours, colleagues, individuals who showed up in his life and through thousands of tiny interactions nudged him towards the path he ultimately walked. And again, the message behind all of this is deceptively simple but incredibly powerful. Your relationships compound in exactly the way your money does. Think about it for a minute. If your financial capital grows steadily over time, your social capital, if you make an effort, can grow in the same way. It's the time spent with people you love and like, the conversations you have. It's those small deposits consistently made that end up building a wealth of connection. And this, I think, is where so many people entering the phase of their life that we call what happens next find themselves at a crossroads. For decades, often social relationships have fitted in the gaps. We tell ourselves we'll invest time in our friendships and social relationships when we're less busy or when the business is stable. So at the minute, I'm spending a lot of time writing the What Happens Next book. I'm 50,000 words in as I speak to you today and currently working to make sure that the book adds as much value as we can to people thinking about that next stage in their lives. Now, the book's not ready yet. It won't be out until sometime in 2025. I'm working hard to get it finished. But what you can do is sign up for the book waiting list so you're one of the first people that gets access. You can simply do that by visiting whathappensnext.life/book. Join the waiting list today and you'll be one of the first persons to get access to the book and some extra goodies when it comes out. Or after the next promotion. We tell ourselves we've got time for friendships when everything calms down. And if we're honest, when does life ever actually calm down? Then one day you look up and realise your working life has been full. You've been successful in your professional and financial lives, but you might have neglected social connection. And that's not a criticism. I've done it in my life. It's simply the reality for many high-achieving people when they're thinking about their work goals. Buffett reminds us really powerfully that we've got the next chapter of our lives to rebalance that equation. Because at 95, with more money than he could ever spend and give away, he doesn't talk about the investments that compounded financially in the retirement letter. He talks about the people he built relationships with, where that relationship compounded emotionally, intellectually, and spiritually. That aligns with the amazing work that I always talk about on What Happens Next by Robert Waldinger, who, after being the head of a study that's the longest study ever on health, happiness and well-being, summarised it in this really simple way. The quality of our relationships determine the quality of our lives. So I'd suggest one question you might want to ask yourself is, who are the people who I like and I love, who also challenge me, support me, illuminate my thinking and lighten my days? Who are the people I really enjoy spending time with? And which relationships do I want to invest more in with more intentionality? Because here's the truth, a lot of people realise too late. A well-lived life is rarely measured in achievements or assets. It's measured in the time we spend building memories with the people we love and like. Now, On What Happens Next, we've done something that allows you to take a look at where you are in your own wellbeing journey and think about how you can improve. And it's a very short quiz that you can get access to on the What Happens Next website for free. I'll put a link in the comments, but you can also start it on the QR code below. And what that wellbeing quiz will do is give you an insight in terms of where you are in various aspects of wellbeing in your life, and then give you something practical to potentially work on to improve your wellbeing. For many of us, that will be in the social wellbeing element, but your one might be different. I'd love to know how you get on the quiz, so feel free to put that in the comments once you've gone and done the quiz. And then in the next sentence, it will casually mention that he still goes to work quite a lot, still thinks clearly, still contributes ideas, still feels surprisingly good most of his time for his age, and still is proactively engaged in life. Because I think Buffett's avoid two traps many people fall into when they approach what's conventionally called retirement. The first trap is to pretend aging isn't happening. That usually shows up as carry on working at the same pace indefinitely, avoiding conversations about health, care and energy, insisting nothing will change as we age when the reality is it does, and planning life as though time isn't a factor. Now, the real risk here is lack of preparation, burnout, denial and disappointment. But the second trap is the opposite of that. It's letting age define anything. This might include stepping back too far too early, losing confidence, withdrawing from things that once brought joy, believing contribution is only for the young, and slipping quietly into a reactive way of living where you're the passenger seat in your own life. The risk here is you stagnate, you get bored, and your world shrinks. Buffett talks about a third way, a way somewhere in the middle, because he talks about an approach where we accept reality but continue participating fully in life within that reality. He doesn't ignore aging, but he doesn't allow it to define him either. And this is where that lesson, when I think about it, is really pertinent for people thinking about their next chapter. Your 60s, 70s, and potentially 80s and longer aren't the end of contribution. It's an opportunity to redefine how it means to you. Not in the frantic, push hard, achieve everything mode of midlife, but in a more wiser, sustainable way. So here's the big question. What does showing up look like for you in this stage of life? Because it definitely doesn't have to mean staying in a job you no longer enjoy, running a business you feel you've outgrown, and keeping commitments that drain your energy. On the flip side, it doesn't also always mean stopping work entirely, dramatically slowing down, or disengaging from the world. If we look at the balance in between, showing up might mean doing work you love to do, mentoring the next generation, or pursuing things you've never had time for before, but you have now. It might mean volunteering or giving back in a meaningful way, or spending more time on health, relationships, and simply being curious. And the important thing here is your financial plan should help you live this way, not restrict you. The goal simply isn't to retire, to stop life entirely and just to rest and relax. It's to get the right balance with a life which includes health, energy, and contribution aligned to the realities of time, but also your values. So as you think about the next chapter of your life, I'd consider these questions. How is my health today? And what do I need to prioritise to protect it? What pace of life feels right for me at this stage of my life? What gives me energy and what drains it? Where do I still feel useful, creative and inspired? And what boundaries do I need to put on my time as I get a bit older? Buffett's fifth lesson is about creating legacy. Now, I've been lucky enough in my time for 20 years as a chartered financial planner to work with a lot of families around inheritance. And I know that legacy can be a wonderfully positive thing, but also a minefield. Some people leave behind clarity, generosity and direction. Others leave behind complexity, confusion, and unintended pressure. I know what one I want to leave to my family, and it's definitely the former. Warren Buffett, in his retirement letter, does something very rare for somebody with his level of wealth. He avoids the desire to continue to rule from beyond the grave. Most people, when they think about legacy, try to control the outcomes. They want to make sure the money is used properly. They want to avoid mistakes naturally, and they want to enforce their values long after they're gone. Interestingly, Buffett goes the opposite way. He chooses the right people, talks about his values and sets the direction, and then steps back, trusting them to intelligently make their own choices. However, he's done a lot more than that. He's given away the majority of his money of wealth during his lifetime. He's simplified his estate so that his 3 adult children, who are already in their own what happens next moments in their 60s and 70s, can carry on his philanthropic work that makes sense to them, not to him. He's not trying to micromanage his legacy. He's empowering other people to do it when he's not here. Because legacy, when you think about it, isn't about control. It's about how much positive impact you can have. And impact works best when the people who are taking the action to have the positive impact have the clarity, the confidence, and the freedom to act. You don't need billions to apply this idea. You just need to be willing to ask some deeper, more meaningful questions about what you want your money and your life to be about after you've gone. Lesson 6 is about perspective. And Warren Buffett at 95 has perspective in bucket loads. In Buffett's retirement letter, he says something quietly astonishing. Not dramatic, not a headline grabbing, but deeply revealing. He feels better about his second life than he does his first. Now think about that. This is a man who in the first half of his life became one of the wealthiest humans on the planet, ran a global investment empire, influenced industries and earned a reputation most professionals could only dream of. And yet, the second half of his life is the one where he values more. The big question is why? I think often when we hit our 50s and 60s, our focus tends to shift to be more aligned with what is actually really important to us. We have more alignment with our values. We have more alignment with our purpose. I had a conversation with somebody only yesterday who said, and now I've hit 50, and she'd only just hit 50, I care more about what I want to do and less about what other people think. And my experience of people who approach this age and beyond, their mindset shift into this attitude where it's about what's important to you, not important to other people. I think when we hit our 50s or 60s, and it's different for all of us, we get to a stage where we go, I've proved what I need to prove. I've done the building. Now I can enjoy, refine, deepen, and improve the life I've already got. So the big question is, what's the incremental next step you can take to get closer to that attitude today? Lesson 7 from Buffett's letter is decide what you want people to say about you when you've gone and take the action now. There's a moment in Buffett's retirement letter where he references a famous story about Alfred Nobel, the founder of the Nobel Prize. Nobel once picked up a newspaper and read his own obituary, printed by mistake after his brother passed away. It described him as the merchant of death because his fortune came from inventing dynamite. The shock of reading that was his legacy changed the course of his life. He redirected his wealth, created the Nobel Prize, and transformed his legacy. Buffett's takeaway is simple. Don't wait for an accident to make you think how you'll be remembered. Write the obituary you'd want and then live your life in a way that aligns with it. Now, when you're younger, this sounds really dramatic. When you're 55, 60, 65 or beyond, it sounds like a really interesting thing to do. Because in the second half of your life, your relationship with time changes. You realise you've built a career, you've built a family, you've made your money and spent some of it. You've gathered stories, scars, you've had highs, you've had lows. and you've often proven what you've needed to prove. You get to a point where you're really thinking what happens next. And that often is about who do I want to be from here and how do I want to be remembered. This isn't about ego. This is about being intentional with our actions. And it's recognizing that legacy isn't something we leave to others, and it isn't always something that happens at the end of our lives. It's something we've got the ability to write line by line in the choices we make today, tomorrow, and the day after. So I think a really powerful exercise to get close to this is by thinking about writing your own obituary. Now, it might be morbid. You might think of it as morbid, but I actually think, and my experience of talking to others about this, is that actually it can become incredibly empowering. So take a pen, a notebook, or open your word processor. Write the first paragraph of the obituary you'd want for your own life. Not the versions full of achievements or job titles, because those things often fade. Not the version you want people to expect, but the version you'd feel proud of being spoken about at your funeral. What kind of person would you want to be? What impact did you have? What values did you live by? What did people feel when they were around you? What did you contribute to your family, to the community, to the world? And what stories would you want to be told at that funeral? And then look at that and say, what actions would I need to start, stop, or change in the next 12 months to move closer to this idealised version of what people remember me when I'm gone? That's going to form an important part of you what happens next. Not only the numbers and the forecasts and the charts that give you the financial freedom to live the life you want, but an understanding and the potential to change into the person you want to be. Here's my last cheeky half a tip from Warren Buffett. Being kind to others is a great return on investment. I call this a half lesson because I think it's super simple and sometimes so simple that it's often ignored. But when a man who has outperformed markets for the last 60 years, built one of the most admired companies on earth, and reached the age of 95 with his reputation fully intact, when he tells you something, you should really, I believe, listen. And Warren Buffett talked in the letter about kindness being one of the most important investments you can make. I think that's worth listening to, because near the end of his retirement letter, Buffett writes something profoundly human, not technical, financial, or strategic. He reminds us that often greatness doesn't come from money, that status and publicity can fade quickly, and power, even though it's defined by some people as success, is a bit of a superficial measure of a successful life. He says the important thing is how we treat people, particularly the people who can do nothing for us in return. And that, for Buffett, is the true definition of character. He talks about the fact, in essence, that kindness costs nothing, yet can be priceless. And it's interesting, when you think about how Buffett's spoken about, he's spoken with high regard, not just from the CEOs or investors he works with, but from the staff who have been loyal enough to work with him for years, the locals in Omaha, the people who are interacting with him in everyday, ordinary ways. They talk about somebody who listened, somebody who didn't need to dominate a room, somebody who treated the receptionist the same way you treat an executive, somebody who offered respect as a default, not as a reward. I think Buffett's built an extraordinary legacy, and one that's available to every single one of us. Because you don't need well to be kind. You don't need youth to be kind or status to be kind. You don't even need permission to be kind. You just need intention. That can be as simple as a smile, a moment of patience, a generous assumption about somebody's motives instead of thinking the worst, a phone call, a compliment, a small act of generosity, a willingness to slow down and actually see what people are actually about. Those tiny interactions, particularly when we're thinking about who we want to be, often ripple outward in ways that are unintentioned. Because kindness doesn't often feel big and dramatic. It is, however, transformational. For the people who receive it, because they feel better, but also for the people who give it, because they feel better too. So if you take nothing else from Buffett's letter, nothing else from this video, nothing else from this entire conversation about a life well lived, I'd suggest that one tip that I'd give is choose kindness in a little way every day with everyone. So that's it. 7.5 lessons from a 95-year-old billionaire that turn out not to be about money at all. They're about life, they're about meaning, they're about values, people, purpose, contribution, and clarity. And whilst none of these lessons require billions of pounds or dollars, they do require awareness, honesty, and a desire to live an intentional life. Part of the issue we've got when we're thinking about what happens next in our lives is having the self-awareness, having the introspection to be able to think about what the gaps in our well-being are. And we're doing loads of work at the minute with what happens next to build solutions that are going to help you think about well-being in a nuanced way when you're thinking about how it applies to your life. One of the first things we've built that you can use today is our What Happens Next quiz. It's free to do, takes about 5 minutes, but what it will do is give you an insight into the areas of strengths when it comes to your well-being and the areas you might want to improve. You can take the What Happens Next quiz at whathappensnext.life/quiz, and I hope it helps you in your journey to work out what happens next for you.